John loved fishing more than anything else. Every weekend, he would grab his fishing rod, pack some snacks, and head to the small lake near his home. It was not a very big lake, but it was peaceful, calm, and full of fish. For John, it was more than just a hobby, it was his escape from the busy world. The soft sound of water, the birds singing, and the cool breeze made him feel free. Nothing could bother him there. But one morning, everything changed. John woke up excited to go fishing, like he did every Saturday. He packed his bag, grabbed his fishing rod, and headed toward the lake. As he approached, he noticed a group of people standing near the entrance. At first, he didn't think much of it, but as he came closer, he realized who they were. It was the HOA, the Homeowners Association. The HOA in his neighborhood was known to be strict. They controlled everything, the color of houses, the types of plants in the garden, even the hours people could make noise. John never had a problem with them because he mostly kept to himself. But this time, their attention was on him. "John, you can't fish here anymore," one of the HOA officers said in a firm voice. John froze. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What do you mean?" "This is public property," he replied. "No, it's under HOA rules now. You're not allowed to fish here without permission," the officer said, handing him a letter. John took the letter and read it. The words seemed unreal. "You are prohibited from fishing in the lake. Violators will face fines and legal action." He felt a mix of anger and confusion. How could they stop him from fishing in a place he had loved for years? He looked around. The lake looked exactly the same, the water sparkled in the morning sun, and the fish swam quietly. Nothing had changed, but according to the HOA, everything had changed. For a moment, John just stood there. He didn't know what to say. Fishing was not just a hobby, it was part of his life. And now, someone was telling him he couldn't do it anymore. He thought about talking to the HOA politely, explaining how much fishing meant to him. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't work. The HOA never listened. They only cared about their rules. John left the lake that day feeling frustrated. He tried to continue his normal life, but he couldn't stop thinking about the letter. Every day, the thought of not being able to fish made him angry. He even started having nightmares where the lake disappeared, and the HOA was everywhere, controlling everything he loved. He decided to talk to his friends. "Can you believe this?" he said. "They are trying to stop me from fishing. It's crazy." His friends were shocked. "What? They can't do that," one friend said. "Isn't the lake public?" "I don't know," John replied. "All I know is, they gave me this letter, and if I fish, I could get fined. And they said they could take legal action too." His friends tried to comfort him, but John couldn't stop thinking about the lake. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the sparkling water and imagined himself standing there with his fishing rod. It was a feeling he couldn't ignore. John decided to visit the HOA office. Maybe he could talk to them, find a solution. Maybe they would understand. He walked into the office with hope, but the moment he stepped inside, the air felt cold and strict. Papers were stacked high on the desk, and the officers sat behind it like guards. "I'm here to talk about the lake," John said, trying to sound calm. The officer looked at him without emotion. "We already sent you a letter. There is nothing more to discuss." John felt a wave of frustration. "But I've been fishing there for years. It's not fair." "Rules are rules," the officer said. "If you continue to fish, you will face consequences." John left the office with his head down. He felt powerless. How could they control something so simple, something that made him happy? The whole idea seemed ridiculous, but the HOA was serious. And they were not going to change their minds. That night, John couldn't sleep. He sat by his window, staring at the moonlight reflecting on the lake in the distance. He thought about all the weekends he spent there, the peaceful mornings, the excitement of catching a fish, the joy of being alone with nature. And now, all of that was threatened. He knew one thing for sure, he couldn't let this happen. He wasn't the type of person who would just give up on something he loved. The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. And with anger came determination. "I will find a way," he whispered to himself. "They can't stop me forever." John started researching. He read about property laws, lakes, and homeowners associations. He asked friends for advice and looked online for any possible solution. Everything he found made him more determined. There had to be a way to protect the lake for himself, and maybe for others who loved it too. Every day, he would visit the lake secretly, watching from a distance. The HOA had placed signs and fences, trying to scare people away, but John was careful. He didn't break any laws yet, he just observed. And as he watched, an idea slowly started to form in his mind. A big, almost impossible idea. But the more he thought about it, the more it seemed like the only way to save his lake. The suspense of the unknown filled him with both fear and excitement. What if it didn't work? What if the HOA found out? What if everything he loved was gone forever? But he couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the lake, calling him back. And that was the moment he decided. He wasn't going to fight with words. He was going to fight in a way no one expected. The HOA thought they had power, but they didn't know John yet. As the sun rose the next morning, John packed his bag again, but this time, it wasn't just for fishing. It was for planning, for dreaming, for taking back what he loved. He looked at the lake one last time from a distance and whispered, "I will have this lake. No one will stop me." Little did the HOA know, their rules had only started a chain of events that would change everything. And John's fight was just beginning. The problem had begun, but the story was far from over. In fact, it was only getting more interesting, more suspenseful, and more shocking. The morning sun hit the rooftops of John's neighborhood, but it brought no warmth to him. The lake, his favorite escape, was now a forbidden place. But instead of feeling defeated, a spark of determination lit inside him. He knew one thing: he couldn't let the HOA win. Unlike other neighbors, John didn't believe rules were unbreakable. To him, rules were only fair if they made sense. And stopping someone from fishing? That made no sense at all. He decided to fight, but not in the usual way. He first tried to reason with the HOA. John sent polite emails, visited their office, even asked neighbors to support him. But every attempt ended the same: cold replies, empty promises, and a stricter tone in every letter. The HOA officers seemed almost unstoppable. They wore their power like armor, and they loved using it. One afternoon, John received another letter. This one was worse than the first: "If you attempt to fish again, you will face a $500 fine. Further violations will result in legal action." John's heart sank, but anger replaced despair. $500 was just a number. His freedom, his happiness, could not be measured in dollars. He decided to talk to his neighbors. Maybe if they understood, they could help. But when he walked down the street, he saw the HOA's influence everywhere. Signs were posted: private property, no trespassing, even on small patches of land near the lake. Conversations in the neighborhood were quiet, careful, as if people were afraid to speak openly. John realized something chilling: the HOA wasn't just strict, they were controlling, almost everywhere he looked. It was not just about fishing. It was about power. And if he wanted to reclaim the lake, he would have to think bigger than ever before. That night, John sat in his small living room with his fishing rod leaning against the wall. He stared at it, almost as if it were a symbol of freedom now trapped behind invisible bars. His mind raced. "There must be a way," he muttered. "They can't have this lake forever. They don't really own it." He started taking notes, researching property laws, and even reading stories of people who fought powerful organizations. Each story gave him ideas, small sparks of hope. Maybe the HOA thought they were untouchable, but maybe they weren't. John also began noticing the little cracks in the HOA's armor. Some neighbors secretly fished at the lake early in the morning. Some complained quietly about the rules but feared confrontation. John realized that if he could find the right plan, he could turn those cracks into a path forward. One evening, he returned to the lake, staying hidden behind trees. The water glistened under the moonlight, and the silence was almost mocking. The HOA had built fences and placed warning signs, but John didn't care. He just watched. And as he watched, a daring thought grew in his mind. What if he could own the lake himself? The idea seemed insane at first. Owning a lake? Could anyone actually do that? But the more he imagined it, the more it made sense. If the lake was his, the HOA had no power. The rules, the threats, all of it would disappear overnight. He would finally be free. John didn't share his idea yet. He knew people would call him crazy. But that night, he made a decision: he would find a way to make it real. He would not only fish freely again, he would take control. The next day, John began a new kind of research. He looked up property listings, ownership records, and legal loopholes. Every step he took made him feel more alive. The fight was no longer about frustration or anger, it was about strategy, planning, and a quiet but growing excitement. But the HOA, sensing resistance, did not back down. They continued sending letters, increasing fines, and posting more signs around the lake. Their warnings were sharp, almost threatening. They think fear can stop me, John thought, but fear has nothing on determination. Weeks passed, and John's plan slowly took shape. He would need courage, money, and patience. But he could already picture the moment he would stand by the lake again, rod in hand, free from every rule and every threat. Every time he thought about it, a thrill ran through him. It wasn't just about fishing anymore, it was about standing up, proving that even a single determined person could challenge power. He smiled, imagining the reactions of the HOA officers when they realized they no longer controlled the lake. One afternoon, he overheard neighbors talking about him. Some called him reckless, others admired his persistence in whispers. John didn't care about their opinions, he had a bigger goal now. He also realized something important: the HOA had underestimated him. They assumed he would give up, like everyone else. But John had never given up on anything he loved. And this lake, this small piece of paradise, was worth more than fear, rules, or fines. That night, as he lay awake, John whispered to himself again, "They think this is the end. But it's only the beginning. They have no idea what's coming." Little did the HOA know, their attempts to control one man's hobby had set a chain of events that would change everything. The battle lines were drawn, and John was ready. The conflict had escalated, but he was just getting started. John sat at his small kitchen table, staring at a stack of papers, maps, and legal documents. The lake was right outside his window, glimmering under the late afternoon sun. Every time he looked at it, a mix of anger and excitement surged through him. The HOA thought they had won, but John had begun to see things differently. He didn't just want to fish, he wanted freedom. And freedom, he realized, came with a plan. Unlike most people, John didn't panic when faced with obstacles. Instead, he analyzed, studied, and looked for openings. He began with something most people ignored: ownership records. He dug through local property listings and legal databases, searching for anything unusual about the lake. Every small detail mattered. Hours turned into days, and slowly, patterns emerged. The HOA controlled rules, yes, but they didn't actually own the lake. It was private property, technically, but no one had claimed full ownership. The idea hit John like lightning: if he bought the lake, no HOA could stop him. It sounded impossible. Owning an entire lake? The thought was daring, almost insane. Yet the more John explored, the more he realized it was achievable. He started imagining it, not just the legal process, but the moment he would finally stand on the shore without fear. The thought made his pulse race. John knew it wouldn't be easy. He would need money, patience, and a precise strategy. But he also knew something most people forget: bold ideas often scare others, and that fear could work in his favor. If he moved carefully, step by step, no one could predict what he would do next. To prepare, John created a plan like a chess game. Step 1, gather information. Step 2, secure funding. Step 3, negotiate the purchase. Step 4, reclaim the lake. Each step had smaller tasks, and John ticked them off one by one. He even imagined the reactions of the HOA officers. They thought they were untouchable, but John loved surprises. Meanwhile, John started observing the HOA from a distance. Every rule they posted, every fence they built, every warning letter, they all revealed something. Patterns, routines, weaknesses. It was like watching a game unfold, and John was learning their moves before they even made them. He also kept his plan secret. Not a single neighbor knew what he was thinking. Many had given up, assuming the HOA always won. But secrecy was key. If word got out, the HOA would tighten their grip, making his plan impossible. As he worked late into the nights, John also imagined a scenario he didn't tell anyone. What would he do if he actually bought the lake? He saw himself standing on the shore, his fishing rod in hand, the water calm and free. He saw neighbors' shocked faces when they realized the rules no longer applied to them. He even laughed quietly at the thought, an impossible dream becoming reality. Money was the next challenge. John didn't have enough to buy the lake outright. So he got creative. He thought about loans, savings, and even unconventional methods to gather funds. Every night, he sketched plans, crunched numbers, and imagined negotiations. The process was exhausting but thrilling. The impossible seemed within reach. One night, as rain pattered against the windows, John had a breakthrough. He realized he didn't need to confront the HOA directly at first. If he quietly secured ownership, he could bypass their authority entirely. The thought gave him a strange mix of calm and excitement. For the first time in weeks, he slept with a smile. But the HOA wasn't going to wait quietly. They continued sending letters, increasing fines, and posting signs around the lake. Their presence reminded John that time was of the essence. Every day he delayed could give them an advantage. And yet, he felt stronger with each challenge. The more they tried to intimidate him, the more clever he became. John also imagined the moment of victory in small details. He pictured removing the signs, opening the lake for himself and a few friends, and seeing the HOA officers' shocked faces. The plan wasn't just about ownership, it was about reclaiming control, reclaiming freedom, and proving that determination could overcome even the strictest rules. By the end of the week, John had a complete strategy. Step 1, research and confirm ownership. Step 2, secure funding. Step 3, make the purchase quietly. Step 4, enforce his rules. Step 5, enjoy the lake without interference. Each step was carefully thought out, and for the first time, John felt that victory was not just a dream, it was possible. The suspense of the coming days made his heart race. Each phone call, each email, each quiet visit to the lake could bring him closer to victory or ruin. But John knew one thing, he was no longer the same man who had been intimidated by a letter. He was a strategist, a dreamer, and soon, a lake owner. And as he looked at the water that night, reflecting the moonlight like a silver mirror, John whispered to himself, "They think they have control. They think they can stop me. But the next move is mine." The comeback had begun. The stage was set. And the lake, calm and quiet under the stars, waited for the storm that was about to arrive. The sun had barely risen when John stepped out of his house with a folder clutched tightly in his hands. Inside were documents he had spent weeks preparing, bank statements, legal forms, and the papers that could make the impossible happen. Today, he was not just a man who loved fishing, he was a man ready to take control. For months, he had watched the HOA post signs, send letters, and tighten their grip on the lake. Every no fishing warning, every fence, every rule had only fueled his determination. And now, the day of reckoning had come. John arrived at the office of the property agent. The building was modern and clean, full of people going about business as usual. To the world, it looked ordinary. But inside, John knew a small piece of his dream was about to become real. The agent, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a professional smile, looked up as John entered. "You're here for the lake purchase?" she asked. "Yes," John said, trying to keep his voice steady. His heart raced like a drum in his chest. The process was not simple. Every form needed to be signed carefully, every condition double-checked. John had spent hours preparing for this moment, but the stakes felt enormous. One small mistake, one missed signature, and it could all fall apart. As they went through the papers, John imagined the lake waiting for him outside, calm and quiet. He pictured himself standing on the shore, rod in hand, free from every sign, rule, or warning. The vision gave him strength. Hours passed. Phone calls were made, signatures were verified, and John signed again and again. He could feel the weight of responsibility and the thrill of victory at the same time. Every document brought him closer to a reality that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. Finally, the agent looked up and smiled. "Everything is in order," she said. "The lake is officially yours." John could barely speak. His hands shook as he took the papers. The lake, mine? The thought seemed surreal. The place that had once been controlled by a faceless HOA was now completely under his ownership. But the real test was not in the papers, it was in the next steps. He needed to assert control, but carefully. The HOA would not accept this quietly. They would resist, try to intimidate, and challenge him. John knew this, and yet, he felt ready. For the first time, the fear of losing control was replaced by the excitement of victory. As he left the office, John imagined walking to the lake. He pictured the fences, the signs, the HOA officers, and then he imagined removing them one by one. The lake would no longer belong to a system of rules and threats. It would belong to him, to freedom, to joy. That evening, John returned to the lake. The air was calm, the water reflecting the golden light of sunset. He carried the documents in a waterproof folder, careful not to let them get wet. Standing at the edge of the water, he felt a mix of awe and triumph. He had done it. The lake, once a symbol of restriction and frustration, was now a symbol of determination and strategy. John could almost hear the lake whispering, as if congratulating him for his patience, intelligence, and courage. But victory did not come quietly. The next morning, the HOA sent another letter. The words were sharp, almost angry. "We dispute the legality of your ownership. Contact our office immediately." John smiled quietly. They thought they could intimidate him, but it was too late. He had anticipated this. Legal ownership was on his side, and for the first time, the power had shifted. That night, John stood by the lake with his fishing rod, casting a line into the water. The cool breeze brushed his face. The water rippled gently, and for the first time in months, he felt complete freedom. No signs, no fences, no fines, just the lake and him. Yet, even in this triumph, a small thrill of suspense lingered. The HOA would not disappear quietly. They might challenge him, protest, or try to interfere. But John knew something important: courage, intelligence, and preparation could overcome even the most stubborn obstacles. As he reeled in his first fish, he whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." They thought they controlled the lake, but now, everything has changed. And in that moment, under the fading sunset, the lake was no longer just water and land, it was a symbol. A symbol of victory, determination, and the power of one person who refused to give up. The big purchase was complete. But as John watched the horizon, he realized the story was far from over. The next chapter, confrontation, control, and true freedom, was waiting, and it promised to be even more dramatic than the path he had taken to get here. The morning air was crisp, and the lake shimmered like silver in the early sunlight. John approached the water's edge with a calm determination. In his hands, he carried nothing but his fishing rod and a small toolbox. To anyone else, it looked ordinary, almost peaceful. But today was different. Today, the rules had changed. For months, the HOA had controlled the lake through fear, fines, and signs. But now, John held the power. Ownership wasn't just on paper, it was real. Every fence, every no fishing sign, every threat from the HOA was about to lose its meaning. He started by walking along the shore, noticing the signs the HOA had posted. Private property, no fishing, violators will be fined. Each sign felt like a challenge. John picked up his hammer and began removing them, one by one. With every sign that came down, a small thrill ran through him. The lake was no longer theirs. It was his. Neighbors watched from a distance, their faces a mixture of shock and curiosity. Some whispered among themselves, unsure how to react. The HOA officers were nowhere to be seen, likely planning their next move, but for the first time, John felt completely in control. He then turned his attention to the fences. Tall, metal barriers that once blocked access now seemed weak against determination. With careful planning, he began unlocking gates and removing obstacles. Each fence that came down symbolized a step toward freedom. The lake, once restricted, was opening up again, not for everyone, but for him and those he chose to allow. As he worked, John felt a strange mix of satisfaction and suspense. He knew the HOA would notice soon. They would call, they would protest, maybe even threaten legal action. But he was ready. Every step had been planned, every move calculated. By midday, the lake looked different. The water sparkled in the sunlight, free from the shadows of rules and fences. The sense of ownership was not just legal, it was tangible. John walked along the shore, feeling the sand beneath his feet, casting his eyes across the calm water. It was his domain now. Suddenly, he saw movement near the parking area. A group of HOA officers had arrived, their faces a mix of anger and disbelief. They shouted from a distance, demanding he stop what he was doing. John paused, turned slowly, and smiled. He didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. He raised his fishing rod, as if to say, "This is mine now." The officers approached, but John remained calm. He had anticipated this confrontation. He had all the papers in order, ownership legally verified, and every right on his side. The HOA could yell, threaten, or protest, but the power had shifted. Neighbors who had watched from afar now gathered, whispering among themselves. Some cheered quietly. Others shook their heads in disbelief. John could feel the tension, the suspense, and the thrill. This was more than fishing, it was a stand for freedom, a victory over control. By evening, the officers left, realizing that legal ownership couldn't be disputed easily. John finally walked along the entire lake, inspecting it, imagining all the weekends he would spend there. Every corner, every fishing spot, every quiet nook was now his to enjoy. That night, John sat on the dock, the moon reflecting perfectly on the water. He cast his line slowly, the gentle ripples spreading across the lake. The silence was serene, yet it carried the tension of what had just happened. The HOA had tried to stop him, but he had outsmarted them, taken control, and reclaimed what he loved. Yet, even in this moment of triumph, a spark of suspense remained. John knew this was only the beginning. Others might try to sneak in, challenge his rules, or find loopholes to regain access. But for now, he was free. And the lake, calm and glittering under the stars, belonged entirely to him. As he reeled in a small fish, he whispered to himself, "They thought they controlled everything. But rules mean nothing when courage and planning are on your side. This lake is mine, and it always will be." The sun rose over the lake, casting a golden glow across the calm water. John stood at the edge, arms crossed, surveying his domain. Every ripple, every wave, every reflection of light was his now. But ownership was only half the battle, the other half was making sure everyone understood who was in charge. For months, the HOA had ruled through fear. Signs, fences, fines, letters, they believed these were enough to control the lake. But John had learned that power wasn't about rules on paper, it was about presence, strategy, and confidence. Today, he was about to prove it. It started small. Early in the morning, he noticed a few neighbors quietly approaching the lake, fishing rods in hand, hoping the new ownership hadn't changed anything. They didn't know. They didn't realize that John now held the ultimate power. John didn't run to confront them immediately. He watched from a distance, hiding behind the trees, letting them feel safe. Suspense built as they cast their lines, thinking no one could stop them. Then, slowly, he stepped out, his figure appearing in the sunlight. "Hey! What do you think you're doing?" John's voice was calm but firm. The neighbors froze. They hadn't expected to see him. The look of shock on their faces was almost comical. One of them stammered, We thought. You thought wrong, John interrupted, walking closer. "This lake is mine. The rules have changed. If you want to fish here, you need my permission." There was silence. The realization hit them slowly: the lake they had fished at for years was no longer theirs. Every fence, every sign, every HOA thread had disappeared, and in its place stood a single man in complete control. John didn't yell. He didn't argue. His calm confidence was more powerful than any shout. He began walking along the shore, methodically checking each fishing spot, each small dock, each hidden nook. Anyone trying to fish without permission would have no escape. Word spread quickly. By mid-morning, more neighbors arrived, curious, confused, or outright defiant. Some tried to sneak in quietly, hiding behind trees or walking along the far side of the lake. But John was ready. He moved silently, like a shadow, and confronted them one by one. "Rules are simple," he said to each person, his tone calm but unbreakable. "You either leave, or you wait for an invitation." The suspense was electric. People whispered among themselves. Some were angry. Others were impressed. But no one dared to challenge him openly. John had not only legal ownership, he had presence, strategy, and absolute confidence. By the afternoon, the lake was quiet again. Everyone who didn't have permission had been asked to leave. John walked along the shore, picking up leftover fishing gear, returning it neatly to the bins. It was almost ritualistic, the act of reclaiming every inch of the lake, making it his in every sense of the word. Even the HOA tried to intervene. A group of officers arrived, faces red with frustration. "You can't do this," one shouted. "We still have authority over this property." John turned slowly, a calm smile on his face. "You no longer control anything here. Ownership doesn't lie with fear or rules, it lies with me. If you want to stay, you'll need my permission. Otherwise, leave." For a moment, no one moved. The officers stared, realizing their power had vanished. They had been used to commanding compliance through intimidation, but John had something they never expected: strategy, patience, and absolute courage. Slowly, they backed away, leaving the lake entirely under John's control. That evening, the lake was silent. The water glistened under the sunset, completely peaceful. John sat on the dock, fishing rod in hand, savoring the moment. Every challenge, every letter, every obstacle had led to this point. He had turned frustration into action, anger into strategy, and restriction into freedom. Yet, even in this triumph, there was suspense lingering in the air. Neighbors would talk, rumors would spread, and perhaps new challenges would arise. But John felt ready. He had claimed the lake, enforced his rules, and made it clear that this domain belonged to him and him alone. As he cast his line into the calm water, John whispered softly to himself, "They thought they could control me. They thought they could take what I love. But now, everything has changed. The lake is mine, and no one will forget it." The lake had been reclaimed, not just with papers, but with courage, intelligence, and determination. And though the waters reflected peace, they also shimmered with the promise of adventure, freedom, and the quiet thrill of victory. The lake lay quiet under the early morning sun. The water shimmered like glass, reflecting the trees, the sky, and the calm that John had fought so hard to achieve. Months of frustration, strategy, and daring moves had led to this moment. For the first time, he could fish without fear, without signs, fines, or rules controlling him. John stood on the dock, fishing rod in hand, and breathed deeply. The lake felt different now, not just water and land, but a symbol of persistence, courage, and victory. Every ripple seemed to whisper the story of what had happened: a man who refused to give up, who turned frustration into action, and who reclaimed what was rightfully his. Neighbors still watched from a distance, curious and cautious. Some avoided the lake entirely now, while a few approached hesitantly, hoping for permission. John welcomed only those he trusted. He had learned that freedom was not just about ownership, it was about responsibility, respect, and choice. Even the HOA had disappeared from the scene. Their letters, threats, and signs no longer held power. John smiled quietly when he thought about them, not with anger, but with satisfaction. He had proven that rules and intimidation could not suppress determination, intelligence, and patience. As he cast his line into the calm water, John reflected on the journey. He remembered the first letter, the frustration, the sleepless nights, and the daring plan to buy the lake. Every step had been a challenge, and every obstacle had strengthened him. The victory was sweeter because it had been hard-earned. Yet, he also realized something deeper. The lake was more than his personal victory, it was a lesson. It showed that standing up for what you love is worth every risk. It showed that courage, patience, and clever thinking can overcome even the strongest obstacles. And it showed that freedom is not given, it is taken, carefully, thoughtfully, and boldly. For John, the lake had become a sanctuary, not just for fishing, but for reflection. Sitting quietly on the dock, watching the water, he felt a sense of peace he had never known. The struggle with the HOA, the planning, the purchase, and even the confrontations had shaped him. They had tested him, challenged him, and ultimately proved his resolve. But life, as John knew, always held surprises. He couldn't predict every challenge that might come next. Perhaps new neighbors would try to sneak in, or someone would test his rules. Perhaps the HOA would return with a new tactic. Yet, he felt ready. Whatever came, he had learned the power of preparation, strategy, and staying calm under pressure. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, John reeled in his line and looked across the lake. He whispered to himself, almost as a promise, "This lake is mine, not just because I bought it, but because I fought for it, believed in it, and never gave up." And in that moment, the lake reflected more than sunlight, it reflected courage, determination, and the quiet triumph of a man who refused to let rules or fear control what he loved. The story of John and the lake was complete, yet the lesson lingered. Sometimes, the things you love most are worth fighting for. And when you do, even the most impossible obstacles can be overcome. The water rippled gently, and for John, every ripple was a reminder: victory is sweeter when it is earned, and freedom is a reward for those brave enough to claim it.